Good evening and welcome to everybody. I'm Councillor Sayar Raza, Chair of Overview and Scrutiny Committee. It's now 7 p.m. and I would like to welcome everybody to this meeting of the committee. My fellow scrutineers, cabinet members and officers of the council and members of the public, whether present with us in House or watching on the committee on the council's YouTube channel. So thank you so much. Our agenda today sees us look at Council response to the Centre of Governance and Scrutiny recent Scrutiny Impact Report. We'll then consider the Council's medium-term financial strategy. In addition, we have several shorter items on our agenda. They are a report on Council's preparedness for the imminent housing inspection regime, updates from the chairs of this year's scrutiny panels, a review of Council's forward plan, a chance to review and revise the committee's own work programme, and any urgent business should there be any. Members will remember that we were also due to consider the work of the SEND division and the Council's Safety Valve programme. However, earlier this month, we were told that SEND area review would take place between 17th and 25th of October, so as we stand. It makes little sense to consider the topic whilst an inspection is taking place. I have asked that the item is brought back to OSC later in the municipal year when the committee will be able to assess the progress and receive an update on the inspector's findings. With that clarification made, I will now take a few moments to set out how the meeting will work. As chair, I will run the meeting and invite people to speak. I hope by combining questions and observations to allow for a more fluid discussion. I shall then invite guests to introduce their reports. I will then invite members of the committee to ask questions of the guest. I or Councillor Meir, my vice chair, shall then speak last and then briefly sum up the discussion and advise of any issues or common ground to note. Every member of the committee who wishes to speak will have the opportunity to speak. Please be mindful of your fellow committee members and our guests and ensure your contributions are pertinent and help us frame a meaningful recommendations. Having set out the way in which I will chair the meeting, let's begin. Agenda item number 1, apologies for absence and declaration of interest and any other communications from members. I have received 2 apologies from Councillor Butt and Councillor Gould. Is there any other apologies? I think there is. Thank you. And do any members of the committee have a declaration of interest that they wish to share? No, thank you. Okay, so moving on to agenda item number 2. So this is LB Hauser response to the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny Impact Review. A number of members and officers in the meeting room this evening will have spent time with the Centre of Governance and Scrutiny earlier in 2024 as they undertook a scrutiny impact review. We have before us in our agenda packs both the Centre's report and the Council response to it. I'm pleased to note that the Centre of Governance and Scrutiny considers scrutiny in Hounslow to be effective and to have the interests of residents front and centre. I'm also pleased to note that the leader and the wider executive and the council's corporate leadership team, CLT, have engaged with the process and have developed a response to the centre's recommendations. As a committee, we have a role to play in considering some of our recommendations. Similarly, the executive and senior officers will have a role corporately to promote good quality scrutiny. Responsibility for effective scrutiny is dispersed. OSC can do so much, but it cannot do everything. As such, and because scrutiny is a key element of good governance, it is important this evening to spend time thinking about the scrutiny as a process and a frame of mind as much as scrutiny as a formal committee in panels. Councillor Rajwat, leader of the council and a portfolio holder for strategy, resources and external affairs, is joined by Mandy Skinner, assistant chief executive and council strategy scrutiny officer, and Ed Hammond, and we do also have Sarah Philby as well. Councillor Rajwat, may you introduce a report? You do have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Great to be back to the committee, introducing what I think is a really important report. You've done a lot of the introduction, as always, on this, but I think it is worth reiterating from an exec point of view. We really do treat scrutiny as an important part of the process, and it's not just a tick box. It is about having meaningful conversations with you in a timely way, and you're absolutely part of that jigsaw of good governance. So we take it very, very seriously, and I suppose that's why I'm always here, and you have the pleasure of my voice very, very regularly. Really great to have Ed here, and I hope the committee will agree with me. He's done a great piece of work here, and so I want to give him as much time as possible. And I suppose we start from the point where you finished, Chair, in that whilst the report has highlighted that scrutiny is effective here in Hounslow, we can't be complacent about that, and we can't sit on our laurels on that. And I suppose one of the reasons that I was very keen to be here is some of those recommendations are very specific to the scrutiny function, but actually you're absolutely right. Scrutiny is a frame of mind. It needs to permeate across the organisation. And so some of those recommendations do pick up what we can do as an organisation better to embed scrutiny alongside everything else that we do in a more joint up, more corporate way. So the committee would have seen in the appendix the action plan that goes alongside the recommendations. I'm just going to draw out a couple of those because some of them are cross-cutting across the organisation. Some of them are things that we can just do as a matter of course in the way we work, and probably timely at the moment when we're looking at the Constitution as well. But I think it's really important that we do have a shared understanding of scrutiny across the senior leadership team, both in terms of officers, but also in terms of cabinet members, but also committee chairs and those on the back benches as well, understanding how scrutiny fits within the organisation, how it can add value, how that critical friend function can work much more effectively. There is a lot of transformation going on across the organisation, and the radical overhaul of consultation and engagement is a key piece of work there. So actually, how does scrutiny work with that broader engagement that we are seeking to embed within the organisation, and how we are more outward looking within our communities at the point at which our communities need us, shaping policies that will have an impact on them, and how we talk to them and get their feedback. That's really, really important. Financial scrutiny, obviously really important. It's not just enough that I come here to talk about the MTFS and then the budget. Actually, how do we embed those financial processes so that you have more confidence and the ability to challenge both myself, cabinet colleagues, and officers on our financial processes? And then we've done some pre-decision scrutiny, but it's been a little bit limited. I think there is a space across the organisation with some of the changes that we are bringing in corporately around that pre-decision scrutiny, but also giving scrutiny that sight very early on so that you can start shaping some of that work that the cabinet are doing on key and important policy drivers and policy changes as well. So I suppose for me, I just wanted to reiterate our commitment to scrutiny, our commitment to making sure that we can be equipping you with as much as you need to be effective, and we're really keen to build on that policy development phrase. So I'll hand over to Ed now if he wants to has any reflections. That's right.
Thank you for that, Councillor Rajawat. So Ed, yes, if you would like to just provide a short perspective on scrutiny in Hounslow, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Leader, and good evening, everyone. So I shall be fairly brief, but I did just want to highlight a few areas where I thought it'd be useful to have sort of clarification on some of what I've written. As you've said, Chair, scrutiny in Hounslow is effective. I think you can be satisfied that the areas that I've highlighted for change and improvement and development reflect the kind of challenges that other councils find with scrutiny as well. There's nothing here that's specific, distinctive, or unique to Hounslow that requires a different kind of response. The couple of things I would sort of though highlight are issues around the clarity around scrutiny's role it is one of these things, one of these challenges that other councils experience as well. The issue around what Scrutiny is here to do, the specific value that Scrutiny is able to add, being able to articulate where and how that value is going to be added, and using that that focus to define what goes on the work programme is, in my view, a central part of ensuring Scrutiny's effectiveness can be developed further. Part of that is itself informed by Scrutiny's access to and use of information. And I've put something in the report about the role of Scrutiny in exercising a watching brief over council services, which I'm sure is something that all of you will be keen for Scrutiny to do, and is a challenge for Scrutiny and many other councils as well. The challenge of getting information in a timely way, presented in a way that enables you to highlight issues where further member oversight and challenge rigour is necessary. Getting to that point of making sure you're getting that information in a timely and proportionate way is tough. But I see from the action plan that you're taking, you are planning to take steps to get there. There's an adjunct to that which is connected, which relates to financial scrutiny, and I note your plans for change on that front as well. What I would point out though, sort of briefly, is that what one distinctive aspect of the work that we did with you here is the quite wide variability in experiences and views on Scrutiny's overall effectiveness, and that was rather wider than we would usually expect to find in a council. And I don't want to dwell on it too much, but we did sort of highlight in the report some relational challenges in this committee and elsewhere that could be connected to this issue around the different experiences and understandings that people have on Scrutiny's effectiveness. And I'm conscious of that in making that recommendation overall about clarity around Scrutiny's role, because I think that will help. Developing a sense of common understanding about what Scrutiny is here to achieve will help to make sure that expectations around Scrutiny's role can be managed effectively, and obviously you're doing work that's going to have an impact. Final point I'd make would be on deep dives. So here again, there is something distinctive about Hounslough's approach, and the approach that we tend to recommend that councils take is to embark on task and finish work, which is quite short and sharp, that moves away from what we consider to be the more traditional approach, which is to take a very, very deep, fundamental, comprehensive review into a topic. And that's a trend that we see councils in other areas, moving towards in the past few years, driven in many cases by resource implications. So when I first came in, I looked at your deep dive approach and I thought, gosh, this looks quite heavy. We perhaps need to try to move the council towards something that sort of looks lighter, looks more dynamic. But in fact, there is something of unique value and use that deep dive work does here for you that is valuable and valued. And it sort of changed my perception, I think, of these kinds of pieces of work and the opportunity that work of that depth and comprehensive nature can have. And while I did have suggestions for you on deep dives, particularly in terms of how recommendations are made, in terms sometimes of how topics are framed, there is something distinctive about the value and depth of that work that I'm really keen to see developed and continued, recognizing the impact that it had in the recent past. So I'll perhaps, Chair, leave it there. Very, very happy to answer members' questions either on the substance or indeed on the methodology for the work. But for now, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Ed, for that. And again, it was a great piece of work there. I do now pass it to the committee. Of course, just to question the report. You've got Ed, you've got Councillor Rajwat here. We'll have the open discussion later on, but over to the committee panel. Councillor Emsley.
Me first. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, Ed, great report. Really enjoyed reading it. I think there was some really interesting recommendations there. It's good to know that we're here for a reason and that we're functioning. That's always nice to see. I had a question, I guess, for you as a sort of external expert coming in and looking at this. One of the things that you highlighted on page 6 was that the preparation and sharing of information with this committee can be a bit patchy sometimes, and that the evidence itself this is evidence in part through the variability in quality and depth of some reports that come to scrutiny. Have there been effective remedies to that in other councils that you could perhaps suggest to us? Would a standardised way of reporting to the committee be useful? And I guess the follow-on question to Councillor Rajawat and others is, would that be useful to officers and to members of the Cabinet to have a set way of reporting when they come to us, to know exactly what it is that they need to give us and that we need to receive?
Yeah, through you, Chair. Yes. So there are a couple of things that can be done in this kind of space. Some of them more process-based, some of them more about relationships and behaviours. So on the process front, of course, yes, I think councils have tried to make amendments to report templates to draw out more clearly what members' intentions are, for example, in bringing something to the committee. So you're designing a template kind of to focus officers' minds on members' core reason for bringing something to the committee. That connects to some of the more behavioural things, which is about developing a greater understanding amongst officers about scrutiny's purpose, its function, and what it specifically is looking for in looking at a given issue. Very often we find, and this is not a specific point about Hounslow, but very often we find that officers are asked to produce a report on subject X for members in committee without really understanding why. And often officers have quite a limited understanding of scrutiny itself and its purpose. And as a result, you end up with reports which can, and this has been the case in Hounslow with some of the reports I looked at, feel and look a little bit like a memory dump, where officers are just putting out, this is what I know about subject X. And that's problematic from two perspectives. Firstly, it's that officer's own perspective on that topic and issue. And secondly, it doesn't necessarily allow members to delve into and focus on a particular issue. There's too much breadth there. So I think if you can pose to officers particular questions that you would like those kind of reports to answer, it helps you to manage that debate and discussion in committee. It means that you leave with a sense that you've managed to subject a topic, an issue, to more robust and forensic scrutiny than otherwise you would have been able to. And you're able to add more value also to officers, because having spoken to officers in other councils who've engaged in this work, there is something about being presented with a challenge or a set of questions by members. These are the things that we want to discuss. And in writing your report, you are starting to think differently about that topic, because in answering members' questions, you are by definition approaching it from a different perspective. So the process of scrutiny almost begins before the meeting, because you're reframing the topic and the issue involved. So there is something there about both the relationship you have with officers, their understanding about scrutiny, and also how the structure of a template of a report can also help to change people's perceptions about what you're trying to achieve.
Councillor Roger, yes.
Thank you, Chair. So on the second part of your question, actually, it ties in very nicely with what Ed has said. As I mentioned in my opening, the organisation is going through lots of transformation, lots of change, the way we interact with our residents, but that's also how we interact internally as well. So we've introduced a new template. Actually, I'm glad Ed said it. We haven't even coordinated on this, but there is already a new template that actually offers that space to challenge officers and think about, actually, why are you writing this report? What is it that you're trying to fundamentally answer? What is it you're trying to explain? And that's been supplemented with training. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that it's perfect, because it is new, and that training is ongoing, and anyone that comes into the organisation is part of that training as well. The other part of that jigsaw is actually also, as a cabinet, we are also demanding much earlier sight of sort of issues, topics, policy areas that either we are interested in or are due for renewal anyway. And so the organisation is moving. And again, that isn't something that's a big bang. It just doesn't happen. You have to let it work through, perfect it, let it go wrong a couple of times before it gets right. And that's where that point around pre-decision scrutiny comes in. Actually, I want to move to a place where what is happening for the cabinet is also something that scrutiny can be engaged in their own right, not necessarily in ours, but that's a process. So I think I absolutely agree with what Ed has just articulated, and we're on that journey. We're not perfect, and we'll get feedback from scrutiny as we perfect it and improve it over time.
Thank you. Any other questions from committee members? That's it, really, isn't it? I mean, I think it's quite detailed to covering quite a lot of those points. So yeah, no, thank you, Ed and Councillor Rashford.
It was really detailed, you're right, but I've got another question. I'm really sorry. It was actually about, I guess, what happens after that report. So, the report template, building those relationships, really important, making sure that we get the right information and help officers and cabinet members when they come to understand what it is the ask is. I guess then looking towards the end of the CFGS report, it talks about a slight inconsistency in recording of decisions, difficulty in reviewing and evaluating them. Is there again, talk about templates and best practice, is there a good way of tracking what happens with these recommendations? I know we're working on a tracker at the moment. What does best practice when it comes to tracking recommendations look like? And again, I guess, same question over to Councillor Rajawat. What would be helpful for officers? I mean, what kind of cadence of reports back would help? We don't want to overload you guys. Equally, we don't want to go a year without an update and then have a load of stuff sort of dumped in one meeting. So any guidance on that would be really useful.
Again, through you, Chair. So the trick starts really with how recommendations are drafted in the first place. So it's about drafting recommendations with a view to those recommendations being treated as targets. So with the level of specificity that they need to have, directed towards the right people. And ones, frankly, that also are kind of achievable. So we talk about, smart targeting, and it's probably a term that you've heard before, and the same principle applies to the drafting recommendations. So it starts really with a form of engagement between Scrutiny and those to whom Scrutiny is directing its recommendations, not to cobble together between you recommendations which are mutually satisfactory in a sort of hand-in-glove way, but for Scrutiny to draft recommendations, but to engage actively and say, well, we're proposing to make these recommendations to Cabinet. We want to be challenging, but we also want to make sure that we're recommending things which are achievable. We want to challenge you, but these have got to be things that are achievable, and B, that we're not, in making these recommendations, inadvertently making assumptions that sort of are wrong, that mean that a recommendation will fall at the first hurdle without us realizing it. So there is a need for a degree of alignment. And I've realized in saying that some will sort of perhaps find that sort of controversial, but I think we've found that sometimes, Scrutiny's got to retain its independence, and that's absolute. But understanding what's doable and what isn't is also important. And indeed, you might have that conversation, and you might conclude, well, notwithstanding that, we still want to draw a line in the sand on issue X, make a recommendation to challenge, provoke the executive to respond, to do X or to do Y. But I think it starts with that dialogue and with that correspondence. And I think you've got to be transparent about how you're having that correspondence, who's having it. Then it is about the process of following up, and it's about having a sense of, when we make this recommendation, when we come back in 6 months or a year's time, as we probably ought to, what will the measure of success will be to demonstrate to us that recommendation has been successfully implemented? And that isn't really the council would have agreed a policy about doing X, Y, Z, or there will be this new structural process in place. You're trying to articulate an outcome on the ground that will have come about in part because of the council implementing the recommendation that you've asked. Now, that's quite challenging, and that's also is why you need that correspondence with the executive to firm up those kinds of issues. I think you're not going to get all the way there immediately. So it's about taking an experimental approach to thinking about different ways you can develop and formulate and draft and agree recommendations, and with that aim, with that outcome in mind. But I think that kind of approach is one that works best. But as I say, a lot of this is about having the discipline to go back 6 months or a year later and consistently track, and then to report back, and then for that to feed back into the Scrutiny annual report to say, we've gone back and these are the recommendations that we've made. These are the ones that have been implemented. These are the ones that haven't been. I think part of this is also about the executive responding substantively to all recommendations that are made, including where the executive decides that it doesn't want to accept recommendations, which is entirely legitimate, giving reasons why not. And I think that's really, really important to the ongoing dialogue working. But those would be the central, for me, things.
Thank you, Ed. Mandy. Yep.
So absolutely, all of that, putting that into practice, there are two particular things I just want to alert the committee to. So making sure that dynamic approach also reflects what's happening at the CLT. So as part of this feedback, the leadership team will be getting the updates as well. We'll be feeding those into things that we're thinking about, things that we're doing. So I think then the second thing that leads to really is in terms of the work programming becoming more of a dynamic activity. And I know the committee is on that journey as well. And I suppose the last thing is, I totally agree with you, Ed, just in terms of the recommendations being about outcomes and that experimental approach, because I think we can very easily just count some things, but that wouldn't really show that anything's changed in the outside world. So I suppose if, together we can just try different ways of looking at things, and if that didn't work, we'll try a different thing. And for different recommendations, we'll need to take a slightly different approach. But I think that for me is the really exciting and interesting bit, that we start to capture progress against recommendations in that outcome focused way, really.
Thank you for that, Mandy. Any other sort of questions about the report? Everyone happy with it? Yeah, I mean, we'll go through the sort of discussion stage now with committee panel. And of course, there will be sort of recommendations that we'll sort of draft up as well, which we kind of already have really. But yeah, it's really just over to the committee members for discussion. Except Councillor Elmsley, it's somebody else.
No, all right, I'll kick the discussion off. So I think, Chair, two clear things from that answer to the questions was, one, making sure that we're posing questions before these meetings rather than just saying, could you give us a report on X, Y, or Z? I think that's something that we should take away as a committee and decide when we're doing the work programme, yes, we like to deep dive on a particular topic, but here's actually the information that we like, here's the question that we'd like to be answered. And then that gives people coming the opportunity to sort of develop their report, and maybe within the confines of a template, maybe within a sort of slightly expanded sort of framework, that makes our business a bit easier to do on an evening. I think also making sure that recommendations are measurable and focused. I think in the past, obviously I have only been a member of this committee for a few months, but in the past maybe we've made recommendations as a committee which have been a bit fluffy and tough to measure and tough to work out what we were trying to get at. So I think making sure that recommendations are laser focused and have a measurable outcome at the end would be super useful. I think the final thing that I picked up in the report, it wasn't really a question, but it was just on page 15. I think the note was that some recommendations we've made in the past have been directed towards external bodies that we have absolutely no jurisdiction over at all. I think there was one last year that was highlighted in the report where we made a recommendation to the Home Office, and I would love to think that as a councillor I could impact what the Home Office does, but I'm under no illusions that I or anyone else in this cabinet can decide what the government's policy is. So I think making sure that our recommendations, to Ed's point, are achievable, but also that they're directed to people that we have some kind of relationship with and some kind of jurisdiction around as a council, I think make sure that we're actually doing meaningful work as a committee, because otherwise it's just sort of shouting into thin air. Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. Hopefully it's not shouting in thin air and we're actually doing something permanent. Councillor Foot, please.
Yeah, I think that reading between the lines on this, what it seems to lead to me is that there is a need for a pre-examination of what's going on. It's no point coming here and then hearing something, because we then got to go away and discuss it. But I think we also ought to have some way within the machinery to meet as a group prior to that, to look at the things that we're seeing coming up, and then feed that through to the cabinet for them to get a pre-discussion, then to come here with having got into it with some depth. So I think there needs to be maybe a relook at the way in which we're organised in order to make sure that what we're getting at is really the things that we need to, rather than come along, talk about everything and think, well, no, that wasn't what I was thinking about. Go away again and come back again in 6 months' time with something new. So I think that we perhaps need to look at the way the organisation is set up in order to deal with those sort of things.
Thank you, Councillor Foot.
Yeah, Chair. Sorry. I mean, I just to comment on that. I think preparation is really, really important and is kind of key to this. I think preparation doesn't always have to mean trying to organise separate pre-meetings. I think there will be certain instances where you've got a particularly complex or contentious or otherwise difficult thing where you might want to come together as a group beforehand. But I'm always very, very cautious about recommending to members that, you know, we start organising informal meetings of committees, because there's something about the business of scrutiny ought to be done in a transparent way, open to the public. And I think there are ways and means of preparation that don't involve the logistics and expense and difficulty, I suppose, of drawing everybody together in a room or indeed online before a meeting. You know, there are ways that you can have information shared with you in a more timely way. There are ways for chairs, I suppose, to coordinate between members of committees, so that as chair you might have a greater understanding about what members' objectives and motivations are by having conversations with a range of members. I think that can be done informally in a way that doesn't require you to come together as a group. But as I say, there may well be a rare instances where that is necessary, but I would not necessarily suggest that that would become a standard operating sort of procedure for the way that you would work day to day. Just my own personal view on that.
No, thank you for that. Yes, please, Councillor Yates.
So I'm looking on page 16. So we just come up with the page. We have the timetable for implementation of what the report is about. And I just wondered, you were talking about us working together and building a shared understanding of scrutiny. What is the plan going to be? What things are you going to be putting in place in order to make this happen for us all? Will there be extra discussions? Will there be extra meetings, training programs, things like that? Or are we just talking about when we're here at scrutiny meeting?
Sorry, sorry, Councillor, is that a question to
That can be to whoever.
So the action plan is our response to the recommendations in there that are in the report. So they highlight the details of what we're going to do indicatively at what point, because you can't do everything at once. So we to try and get best effect. In my mind, yes, there are more conversations that will flow as we start putting things together, as we start responding. So as I said, there are certain things that the organisation needs to do. So I probably need to come back and give you some reassurance that those are actually being bedded in. In other places, there are things that the committee may want to do, and there's a conversation that will flow from that. I don't know whether anyone wants to add anything to that. Sarah?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Yates. Yes, we will need to do some preparation as officers, but we will then certainly look to bring you together as a committee with colleagues from CLT, with colleagues from the executive, to have those facilitated conversations and establish that agreed understanding. And there'll be work between meetings, not a huge amount and not necessarily all super formal, building on what Ed just said. But I think that dialogue supported by us as a group of officers will be a feature going through. And that's something we'll look to start the preparation for, subject to the recommendations flowing from tonight's session, as soon as we've got that clarity on what we've all agreed and signed up to do next. And then certainly on the member development side of things, I think that's a conversation we'll want to have with you as a committee as to how best we can do that, building on the infrastructure we've already got. So when we support you with the sort of preparation for these, how can we use that session as well as formal training opportunities as well? So yes, more work to do, not necessarily all in the formal committee meetings.
Yeah, thank you. That answers my question. Obviously, a really important committee. really good report. So look forward to developing on it.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Okay, so a lot has been said. There's lots in that report. Yeah, I'm just going to go through some recommendations with the committee panel, and as long as we're all in agreement, this is not just going to be just this will set it in stone then of everything that we've heard. So here we go. What I propose is welcome, of course, your report, the CFGS findings, and the views that scrutiny is effective and excuse me, has residents' interest at heart. Endorse the council's action plan. Work with executives and OSC to ensure the most effective financial scrutiny possible. Welcome commitment to pre-decision scrutiny. OSC further develops its approach to work programming and specificity about focus. Encourage OSC to make crunchy recommendations, achievable and capable of being tracked as well. Is all committee happy with those recommendations? Thank you so much. That is passed. Here we are. All right. Okay, so I'd like to thank Ed and Mandy as well, of course. So thank you so much for being here. Love for you to come back anytime and give us some feedback. It's absolutely brilliant. So thank you so much for that. You are, of course, more than welcome to stay, or you can, of course, leave as well.
I'll stay with it for a little bit.
So
Chair, 'cause
okay,
I'm quite interested in the next item. So
Next, okay, fair
enough.
enough. Fair enough. Yes, thank you for your time. You can, of course, stay or leave. Councillor Rajawat, now, this is slightly different for you. You've got the ball and chain around your ankles, so you can't go anywhere, I'm afraid. But we do now move on to agenda item number 3. This is the One Hounslow Financial Strategy Review. One of the main items of business tonight is the One Hounslow Financial Strategy. This is the Council's medium-term financial strategy, the development of which is key component of ensuring sound financial management and delivering against the Council's commitments. The One Hounslow Financial Strategy set out on a medium-term thinking to 2027 to 28. We'll be looking at the 2025-26 budget in January when we next meet, by which time the country will also have a chance to digest the Chancellor's budget, which is due on the 30th. Cabinet will next discuss the budget in December and again in February before the budget is taken to Borough Council. So this is an opportunity for OSC to play a role in pre-decision scrutiny. And we've been asked to note the comment on the One Hounslow Financial Strategy. Councillor Rajawat is still, of course, with us, with Jake Hounslow's Executive Director of Finance Resources. Welcome. Councillor Rajawat, if you could take 5 minutes for your report. Yep.
So I'm going to be very brief on this one. Jake's doing most of the heavy lifting on this. As you said, this is a review. It stems from the One Hounslow financial update that was presented to Cabinet in July, shortly after the general election. New government, new opportunities, mission-led government based around growth and what the Prime Minister describes as national renewal. Obviously, things were as they were at that point, and it is constantly changing. The picture is constantly changing. There are structural issues that exist that are playing out, not just in Hounslow, but across across London and across the country, indeed. And Jake will articulate some of those in his comments. We are looking with one eye to the budget at the end of the month, see what the Chancellor has got to say there, and then potential spending review in the spring as well, and see what that means. So rather than me droning on, I'll hand over to Jake to give you a little bit more context.
Thank you very much, and good evening to everyone. Just to give, this is the first time this item has come to this committee, and it's in the spirit of the previous item that we thought we would strike while the iron's hot and bring this item straight away. It's all done in the spirit of continuous improvement as well. And as the paper has laid out, this is really focused on the general fund, and we'll develop the HRA and the capital aspect of it as well as we go through the process. But I thought it'd be important just to give you a quick oversight in how we build the budget strategy over the next 3 years and give you an opportunity to test and challenge some of those assumptions that we make. As the leader said, this is the report that went forward in July. It would have been published probably just before the election. And what we do at that point in time, first of all, we take a paper every July, which sets out the subsequent 3 years of what we think and estimate the budget position and therefore the strategy to manage that financial position to be. So first of all, we estimate what has been for the last 10 years, what the budget gap is over the next year, 2 years and 3 years. And we use and triangulate data from different sources, economic data, macroeconomic data. We know that's been particularly volatile, so it has been quite challenging. We don't have economists in the finance team. We use Office of Budget Responsibility data, Bank of England data that's out there and has professional wraparound on that. We assess our internal demand, and that demand tends to be, and always is, adults and children front door demand, with increasing need to calculate and estimate what temporary accommodation is, because I'm sure the committee will be aware that temporary accommodation is a particularly new phenomenon in London, which is causing a huge budget overspend spikes right across the capital. We make assumptions and we bring forward previously agreed savings that have been approved at the previous full council, and we test those, assume primarily that they still are on track and they can be delivered. And the challenging part of this, in amongst all of that other challenging work, is trying to estimate what we think government funding is going to be. So there are two really key elements that fund local government: council tax and core government funding in the shape of settlement funding agreement, as they call it, which is the technical term. As I've said, there's an important context for all of this. I would say 24-25 has probably been the most volatile in terms of the financial position that I've ever experienced in certainly in my very short time at Hounslow, but in my time as working in finance in local government. You will have seen in the news that London is experiencing quite big overspends. At the last sort of reported position, London across the board was projecting about 600 million overspend. And we are one of those. We are quite resilient to it with our reserves position, but we're not immune to it. So we have to bring all of those factors into our thinking and make sure we're prepared and we plan for different eventualities. That's the London context. The national context is, you'll have seen that obviously there's a budget next week. I'm not going to preempt what may or may not come out of the budget, fingers crossed. But we're also outside of a spending review. We're outside of a fair funding review that has been dangled over our heads for many years. And that fair funding review is not about necessarily the difference between the spending review and the fair funding review. Is the spending review is the central government departmental spending position. So what MHCLG will get, what NHS will get, and the rest of it. And the fair funding review is how MHCLG divides their funding across each authority through a formula. We've been waiting for one of those for quite some time, and hopefully one is imminent. Not only is the budget not announced yet, but we only get the budget will be the broad strokes of where the economy is going and what the government is doing about that. Hounslow's financial funding position we won't know until the week before Christmas, which is in the form of the provisional local government finance settlement. So that's when we know our numbers and what we know we'll get. And it used to be in October, and it's got later and later. Now it's the week in the run up to Christmas. So there are assumptions, what we think from past experience, what we think we might get going forward. In amongst all of that, we look at our reserves position. Reserves are at Hounslow, I would say in London, put us in the upper quartile of resilience, but as I've said, not immune. And there are things that we still don't know about pay awards and things like that. So again, assumptions all embedded into that table that you see in the appendix, which sets out the £30 million gap for next year. Just some key things that we have experienced. Core funding, it comes in the shape of general grants, social care specific grants, so it's very much ring fenced to those areas. Other things like new homes bonus, which is an incentive for house building that used to have a legacy payment to it, and that legacy payment has reduced year on year. So it has led to reductions in some of that core funding over the years, which is what has led to, and then when you bring in the spike in inflation, the £30 million budget gap is really, I mean, I think it's probably the highest budget gap for the following year that Hounslows has experienced, and that is really a culmination of an 11%, I think it was 11% about a year ago, inflation spike, which is what we're experiencing now are costs which are around about 20% higher than they were 3 years ago. And the funding that we've received, in the shape of core funding or council tax uplifts, which is capped at 5%, clearly has not kept up with that inflation. And so it's led to a divergence in the budget gap, which has led to what we're experiencing, not just at Hounslow, but across London and across the sector, I would say, as a whole. So all of that is triangulated into the table that you'll see in the appendix, which I'm just trying to refer to the table number, which is at what we call Table 2, Updated One Hounslow Financial Strategy Block. So that is effectively what we have. We bring forward the budget gap, we bring in those assumptions around inflation, pay award, core funding, anything around capital financing. We then naturally have to deal with the budget gap through savings. And this is the first of 2 sessions in finance, really. Today is to talk about how we build the strategy. And then in January, once we've had the internal discussions and gone through the validations, we'll bring the actual savings proposals to that session, and you'll have an opportunity to scrutinise those from both a technical point of view and a policy perspective. And then we have what we call bridging items, which is effectively what we think are one-off pots of money that will help support the following year's budget position. Not only have we had a spike in inflation, but there's been a small upside in interest rates, which, from bank account interest earnings we've got in our bank account has given us a bit of headroom. But we know now that inflation has come down. It's actually below, at the time of writing, I think it's about 2.5% in this report. It's 1.7% now. So we need to rework those numbers. But we do know that interest rates are still high, at about 5.13% for PWLB borrowing. That will come down, but there's a lag. It won't, there's been one sort of sub 2% position on inflation. We need a couple more of those before the Bank of England start making decisions. And again, I don't want to preempt that, but we will run those numbers back through our models when official announcements are made. I'm going to leave it there actually, and open up to any, or pass to you to bookend it. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Jake. So I suppose to offer reassurance to the committee, often one of the first questions is loads of authorities are declaring effective bankruptcy. They can't meet their liabilities. Are we close? No, we're not. That's an absolute reassurance to the committee. We are in a, when I talk about sound financial prudent management over the years, what that has led to is the ability for us to absolutely have ambition for our authority, long-term change in services, and the reserves to be able to deliver on some of that ambition and that long-term change. So we're we have one eye on the future, one eye on what we want our council to look like, and we've got the ability to deliver that. Obviously, the delivery plan is absolutely key to that, and the ability to track that through and for you to scrutinise that as well. But also, I'm pushing myself, officers, and the cabinet as well to look at that £30 million gap, look at the mitigations, look at how we can mitigate those so that we've got a set of proposals that you can scrutinise in January that then goes on to council as well. So I don't want anyone to feel panicked around the table, but I do want to be absolutely clear with you that we take this very, very seriously, and we are pushing very, very hard through the various strands of work across the organisation to be able to deliver that balanced budget, but also long-term change. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you for that both. Okay, I'll pass it now to thank you both. So I'll pass it now to the panel for points of clarification. So you just heard the report there, quite substantive. Excuse me. Any questions? Councillor Hemsley.
Yeah.
Councillor Meir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
The question to Jack. As you mentioned that the funding we receive from council tax and other services does not match with the inflation. How is the council planning to mitigate the impact of reduced central government funding on key local services?
Still getting to grips with this, actually. So in terms of how we deal with this, obviously, it would be remiss of me not to use this forum to, ask for a good funding settlement in the next few months, actually, from government. Where we have to go is we have to look at all the efficiencies, be as efficient with our front door, make sure we treat people fairly and efficiently, because not only do you treat people properly with vital services, but you can do it at much more value for money way as possible. The makeup of our budget is people and contract as well. We make sure we try and have robust relationships with our suppliers, making sure that value is really wrung out of those contracts as far as possible. I think you can see in the report, we have about £200 million per annum on contracts that we have. And so we have a process where we, inflationary uplifts, for instance, asks from suppliers are really scrutinised so they're not just agreed matter of hand. There's a process that goes through there. So the funding that we do receive, or the capped funding that we receive, can be dedicated to the front line as much as possible. There are questions, and we have to, I'm not going to preempt any policy decision, but obviously council tax itself is a key policy decision that will be made over the next few months as well. I think if you look at what's happened over the last few years, the council did make use back in nearly 10 years ago of the council tax freeze. And then I think since then it's sort of gone up by the maximum that it has done. Whether that happens in the future, we need to wait and see for government funding announcements to be made. I may have gone off track now. Is there any specific question you want to ask me on? Yeah. Yeah.
What criteria are being used for priority services?
So the One Hounslow financial strategy, which is our term and use of the word phrase medium-term financial strategy, which is the generic phrase, is also complemented by the One Hounslow strategy itself, which sets out the priorities of the organisation. So effectively, the two things feed back to each other. One sets the financial constraints and framework to deliver those things, and equally, those things are constrained by the ability to pay for them. So it's a constant feedback loop on what can be delivered, what should be delivered within the context of members' priorities, but it's members who set that direction ultimately. And my job is to say, well, this is how much money you've got to pay for it. I don't know if you wanted to come in on the policy side.
Councillor Roger.
Yeah, thank you. So I suppose it sounds a little bit glib to say it this way, but I think we are absolutely committed on prevention. So actually, what we found during the pandemic is that our residents really do value the services that the council have provided. And so for me, as leader of the council and the cabinet and officers, we want to try and protect those services at all costs. And part of that is preventing people falling into crisis. So you'll know that one of the first things we did was look at our equality, diversity and inclusion policy, which looked at areas where there is deprivation and some of the causes of that deprivation and the poorer outcomes for those residents and what happens when they do fall into crisis, and trying to prevent that. So there are some, some great work going on in there. The community solutions model, where we are out in the communities, is not just about being there when people want advice. It's about having a space where residents can go when they are falling into crisis. So we know that if someone's got a problem with their housing, often there'll be a problem with some sort of financial problem as well. So actually, if you can capture those two things and offer support, maximizing their benefits, and maybe offering them some health advice as well at the same time, actually, you're not just looking at 3 isolated services. You're looking at a suite of wraparound support for that individual. Now, through this strategy and the way we've managed our money, actually, we've got the ability, I call it an invest to save. Put the money in now, because you will make a saving if you're preventing people falling into crisis later on. Another key thing for me that we absolutely need to get right is health integration as well. So the interchange between health and social care, because at the moment it can become quite expensive because that interplay, it's good in Hounslow, but it's not perfect. So actually we can be much, much better at someone going into hospital, someone accessing social care, and how that works together. And so Councillor Lily Bath is working quite hard at that. And we're doing some great work there, leading nationally, but there is more that we can do in there. So we've got to be willing to try and test out these things and invest to try and get those savings further down. But it's not just about the savings. I genuinely believe that having a more integrated offer will deliver you a better outcome for that resident as well.
Councillor Tack, please.
Thank you, Chair. We earlier talked about the interest rate trajectory, and you said like you can run those numbers, but I want to ask a question like how flexible we are in terms of replacing our loans, as in when the interest rates go down, although we don't know whether they will go down or not, but the current trajectory points that it will go down. So how flexible we are in terms of how soon or how quickly we can replace our loans with the new rates?
Yeah, we are quite flexible because we know it's going to happen. Question is when. So our strategy around Treasury is to take just some shorter term borrowing to allow us to refinance when those interest rates do come down. So it was actually taken, the audit committee, instead of going to PWB for some borrowing for our capital programme, we actually use some inter-authority borrowing, which is actually a much more preferential rate over a matter of months, actually, which, number one, we get a rate that's lower than PWB, and we actually take advantage of a preferential rate by borrowing, doing council to council borrowing, which is absolutely standard practice. So we do sweep the market. I wouldn't necessarily say that I would wait 6 months before I'd embark on any longer term borrowing, at least.
Councillor Emsley, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Two sort of sections to ask questions on. The first is on a very specific part of this financial strategy, and that's the housing revenue account. So I think page 7 of the report talks about a net overspend in the HRA of £5.3 million. It talks about an HRA recovery board, which is looking at making savings within the housing department. Could you give us sort of some indication of what kind of action can be taken in the HRA to make up that shortfall, and what sorts of savings the HRA recovery board might be looking at making in the short term?
Yeah, with your permission, Chair. Yeah, so the HRA business plan set annually, and the reason for that is to be really particular and quite precise about what's going on with the value of money, the value of repairs, the rate of repairs is how they're delivered, but also the condition of the stock. So there's a load of variables that need to be taken into consideration. A lot of the business planning is around estimates and forecasts. And as those estimates and forecast changes, we need to be really intuitive and quite dedicated in terms of the actions that we take in order to keep the HRA in a sustainable position. This year, inflation has fallen to not far off the Bank of England predicted base rate, but contracted activity has not followed suit. So some of the predictive analysis that was in this year's business plan in terms of the tailing off and the rate that we commit to repairs of the stock, the general condition of the stock, the contracting around the HRA in general, the way that we clear voids, the way that we commit capital, the way capital comes online and we can complete capital projects, and the way that we collect rent needs to be continually calibrated to make sure that those assumptions aren't too far out of kilter. This year in particular, we've seen the cost of repairs not fall because of the baked-in requirement and the baked-in nature of inflation within those contracts and contracted supply, but also we've seen rents capped. And that means a number of things. It means within our overall stock, we have to be really careful about the way that we release funding into the asset in order to collect the rent, but we don't overburden the HRA with cost such that it becomes unsustainable. And we have to manage that through really, really carefully. And what HRA board is doing is effectively calibrating 5 metrics. The first metric is around capital completions. So Modesta meets with Peter O'Brien as the Director of Regeneration in order to calibrate the way that capital completions come in and the way that rent and service charge is collected from those new stocks. Voids is monitored carefully in terms of the way that voids are turned around, the cost of those voids, the average cost of those voids, but in particular, the way that the standards, the regulatory standards around decent homes is applied such that we invest the right amount in our stock, but we're not overcommitting capital because we need to make it spread as far as we can go to bring as many units forward to hit decent home standards. In relation to disrepair, we need to make sure that our disrepair compensation is calculated and forecast. You're always going to get disrepair claims in any housing system. It's part of the new regulatory framework and it's been reformed this year. So every housing authority in the country is looking at disrepair as a new budgeted entity within this financial year. And the last one is staffing costs. So housing as a profession clearly is under intense scrutiny, and housing professionals are having to train and put more time into training, which meant inherently the value of contracts, human resource contracts, is increasing, putting pressure on. So every time somebody leaves and you recruit somebody else, inevitably there's a pressure because they cost more money. So those 5 metrics are really calibrated very carefully in order to consider the overall stock and move it forward quite carefully. All of which means that the HRA remains balanced and sustainable. In relation to next year's business plan and planning, we're already planning on what we're taking through to Cabinet on January to refresh the position in order to sponsor that 30-year look ahead, but taking very 1-year precise calculations of what we're doing with our asset and everything that revolves around it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Phil, for that. It's okay.
Yeah, great.
Because of course we've got housing. I don't want to.
I was going to say I don't want to over-egg it, so
Yeah,
I'm not going to dwell on that one. My other one, just quickly then, back to Jake and Councillor Adjawat. we talked a lot about savings, and obviously, Councillor Rajat, you talked about invest to save, but obviously there are some actual savings that we have to make to plug that gap as well. And I know that on page 3, we talk about efficiency save initiatives and savings that have to continually ensure resources reflect the council's key priorities. And page 13, there's it's almost like a worrying graph of areas where we've identified potential savings could be made. How are those savings identified? What's the process? I know we talked about sort of key priorities and policy areas, but what's the process of identifying the other side of that coin? And I guess, not asking for a sneak peek, but where are we looking to make up the majority of that saving gap that we need to find?
Yeah, so you're right to say key priorities will drive some of that invest to save, long-term transformation. Beyond that, if I'm very honest with you, Councillor Ramsey, everything is on the table. Nothing is off. Every stone needs to be, and this is some of the rigor and the pressure that is applied to officers and cabinet as well. So I'm not going to give you a sneak peek because we're still working through them. There's one side being able to identify saving, then it's being able to understand what effect that will have on the wider system, and making sure that we can actually deliver it in a sustainable way whilst also protecting the services that our residents value. So by way of reassurance, nothing is off the table. And that's why we're back in January, because we need that time to go through that process.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, so I think we've got Councillor. Oh, he's. Do you want to wait for Phil to come and then? Do you want to ask Modesta the question?
Yeah, I mean, it's really. Yeah, I'm thinking back 2-3 years ago. We had quite a high void rate, empty properties, and it's really the question I'm asking is how is that going? Is it going down, or is it going up, or is it remaining at the same sort of level as it was? Because it was obviously something quite worrying that time, and it's where we're at now.
So I'll start. It's a key focus, and Councillor Ramsey is in the room, so he knows. He's asked many a similar question as well. It is a priority for the administration because every void is income that we're not getting in towards HRA. So the last time I checked in with Modesta and Phil, it was going down. Obviously, there is a proportion that we have to keep for operational reasons, but there is a focus around turning those voids around as quickly as is possible, to make sure that they're of a decent quality for someone to move into. Don't know whether you want to update any further on that.
Yeah, we can do. So voids are split into 3 categories in respect of yeah. So voids are split into 3 categories: major, minor, and voids that need very light touch work. We try and maintain less than 2% in the stock. We're just above 2% in the stock, but the direction of travel is coming down overall. We are really focused on what's called the lettable standard. And that means that we're putting the right amount of money into voids to get them to a position whereby they can be occupied and habituated, but to a point whereby they're at decent standard. If we invest too much money, we are not maximize the amount of revenue and capital within our stock to mean that we can accelerate. And we are always looking at ways that we can improve the way that we turn voids around quicker. And as part of the improvement board, we're looking at that right now with colleagues in Lambton.
Thank you, Phil. Yeah, I mean, it's always good to get that income in from the voids. Councillor Meir, please. Okay, this is a question from myself then. For me, is we do get a very good sort of charts and everything of this is what happens when we don't do anything. So I'm gonna flip it on this other side. So give me the good example of doing something to reduce the overall budget gap.
You really put me on the spot. So let's think. Well, so it comes back to the delivery plan. Although it hasn't yet started to deliver because it's in early days, the community hubs model is and being in localities is a perfect example of actually how we put some money in, invested in local assets, made sure the staff are in the right place to offer that help and advice, and that feedback loop, and they're also here as well. I think that's a really, really good example of where we've actually spent some money in it, and it should deliver the financial saving as well. But more importantly, it's the outcomes.
Brilliant. And just when we come to report those, will we be sort of highlighted? So going forward for OSC, will that be sort of highlighted that, look, we've done this, and this is what we saved. But if we didn't do this, this is potentially what would happen.
Well, so I suppose it goes back to that. If we didn't do it, it would be the do nothing scenario. So yeah, that would be articulated, and yeah, we need to make sure that we're articulating what these programs are actually delivering. So there is a point where actually, to use that example, that will go from something that is carefully project managed, implemented, into business as usual. And then the challenge for us as an organization, what we need to be able to demonstrate to Scrutiny is actually, as it's got into business as usual, it's not then just fallen off a cliff. It actually carries on delivering what we expect it to deliver. So we will be monitoring that as a cabinet through the performance reporting, and we need to be able to demonstrate that to you as well as over in Scrutiny at the regular point. Yeah.
And I guess we can use that as a tracker as well, so we can get that sort of financial tracker as well. Yeah.
So just to elaborate a little bit on the that example, which is sort of part of the Transforming Community Experience program in itself, there is a tracker, and a lot of the foundation work is happening. So as the leader says, that will now start to come through. That will be appearing in the delivery plan updates that come to cabinet, and I think come here as well. But we can put a bit of a spotlight on that. So you know, the council more generally will be able to see for that investment how the savings are then made. A lot of those are made through, you know, be it technological improvements as well in the back office, but also in terms of, as leader said, understanding how we save money by that early intervention activity, and we'll be modelling that out.
Thank you for that, Mandy. There is actually another question here. I'll just say it. So could you explain the inflation release request?
The inflation release request. Is this in the context of how we budget for just general inflation and how we apply it to our contracts?
I really don't know. That's why I'm asking the question.
If I were to assume, I think I sort of mentioned it earlier on. As we sort of build our budgets, we assume what we think we need to put aside for inflation, and that is by you know, inflation according to pay and inflation according to contracts. What we put that aside, we don't just apply it to, you know, blindly then to those contracts. We ensure those, certainly when it comes to contract management, we expect the contract owners to have those robust conversations to reduce that inflation exposure. So, you know, for example, you know, we put, I think, about 7 million aside for the 24-25 for adult social care contracts, but actually what we distributed to those contracts was about 6.2. So we've got about 0.8 headroom in there that can help mitigate the in-year pressures that we're experiencing at the moment. So it's about making sure we've got the mechanisms of internal scrutiny with our suppliers before we just apply funding or inflation funding directly to and release that to the contract. So I hold on to that.
Perfect. Yeah.
Is that the answer?
Thank
Good.
Any other questions from any other members? No? Happy with the report? Councillor Yates, here, please.
So I'm not sure you'll be able to answer this question. With the proposed changes to the council tax, how much are we hoping to get back from that towards the budget?
So we are in the middle of consultation. So obviously, I don't want to preempt what the final scheme will look like. If we implement the scheme as we've proposed in the consultation documents, it will save about £4 million. 4 million. So it's a significant chunk, but also it means that we can be very, very targeted on those that need the most support, and that's one of the key drivers of the changes to the council tax support scheme.
So with the 4 million, will we lose some of that to the scheme where we need to help those more in need, or is that's totally separate? That's budgeted separately. Okay, thank you.
Brilliant. Any other questions? No. Committee members are happy with the finance. I mean, to be fair, it's very prudent. I mean, we do have good. We do have good budget. I mean, we do have some fun. I mean, Jake was just saying earlier on that he wanted 200 million, I think, from the Chancellor or something like that every year for his
Why
budget.
stop there?
Fair enough. There we go. Okay, brilliant. Thank you for that. Okay, so we move to sort of within the committee panel to sort of discuss and then bring up sort of recommendations. Yeah, let's have a discussion. Is everything all right? No? Yeah, go for it.
Go on then, I'll bite. I think, it's always tough, isn't it? And I think what we've heard from that discussion is that it's going to be really tough to set policy and decide what we do with the budget until we know what money we have in December. And so there's lots of sort of principles and frameworks in this report, which is obviously important because that's how you govern any budget. But fundamentally, the policy decisions can only really come when we know how much we're getting from the Chancellor, and hopefully it's more than 200 million, but I guess we'll see. I suppose if I was to make a recommendation that we could note down here, it would be maybe, it's not even for Jake and Councillor Rajwat, but for Phil to understand maybe in January where we are with that HRA gap filling and what impact that has. I know we're getting onto that in the next item, what impact that has on the current things that are currently going through in the current policies that are currently being implemented in the housing department, because there are quite a few changes happening at the moment. I know, again, this is not to preempt the next report, but will there be an impact? And if there is, it would be nice for that to come to this committee so that we can have a discussion around what we prioritise inside that HRA budget. So it's not really a policy recommendation because I think that's tough to make, but I would love to have the HRA team come back in January and discuss what the implications of the final settlement are for current policy progression.
Thank you. We can certainly look into that, of course. Okay, so we've got a couple of recommendations, and feel free to put them in. Just write them up. Oh, Councillor, anything? No.
No, I think the question. Sorry. Yeah, given the current inflation levels, how will this affect the council budget for essential service such as healthcare, education, community support in the coming year?
I think, as I sort of said when I presented it, it's going to impact in the sense that the divergence between the funding that we've received and the inflation as it's embedded has left a divergence, essentially. So that means all the policy decisions that we need to make that we've discussed already will need to really focus on value for money, making sure we really assess the outcomes are being achieved for the amount of money that's been put into them. So it just means we have to be a lot tighter with our decision making, ultimately, is the broad kind of response to that. When it comes to the HRA as well, not only is CPI was obviously a big driver of that delta, but materials costs and the inflation experienced in the actual building of units and properties and assets was even higher. It was 20-25% at one point. So again, the ability for the HRA, because the HRA is a contained sort of financial ring fence. Ultimately, people who pay their rents and leaseholders are the people who allow us to borrow to deliver more housing. But if the housing costs have gone up, you then have to, again, be a lot, the prioritisation question that's come forward it becomes a lot starker. So it just means we have to make reduce resource go further, essentially. And that comes through, working together with partners, being a lot better at how we deliver outcomes in a maybe a bit more of a radical way, because it has to be focused on outcomes and not just the method of delivery. So working better with, as I say, partners, suppliers, neighbouring councils.
I'm listening. Yeah, you mentioned about the material cost going up. Now that the inflation has gone down, will that mean we'll make some sort of saving?
It won't necessarily make a saving, because those costs are embedded. Inflation sticks, and that's the problem and why it's so pernicious. I don't necessarily think material costs are going to come down, but what we need to make sure is that they don't keep going up. Or say what we need to make sure. I have no control over supply chain, and it's not just inflation is caused by international supply chain issues as well. So it is difficult to get materials for things. But you might know more about what's going on in the actual market.
Yeah, I mean, it's the cost of inflation is doing one thing, which is good. Inflation, when we look at it in terms of consumption, is becoming more affordable. When you look at the way that businesses are running geared, they still rely on institutional loans, and institutional loans have not come down in line with inflation. So if you're running a business and you're running business risk and you're borrowing in order to run your business and you're repaying debt, that is still way above inflation. And that's the price of contracting. That is the price that's passed through to us as a housing repairs organisation, if you like, or a housing provider. And that's the burden that the HRA will carry, or in the relationship to the general fund will carry if it's outside HRA activity. So it's the cost of business to business transactions as opposed to just purely CPI or purely an inflationary based argument. So a reduction in inflation is good, but it doesn't really represent what we are paying for repairs.
I just wanted to follow on that. That's because, of course, businesses are borrowing money, and they cannot drive their costs down. So, of course, it goes to the customer, which is us, and then the cost keeps going up. So our costs will always keep going up. I'm guessing we've kind of factored that in.
Yeah, we do. We factor in those assumptions in the same way as the general fund inflationary. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, unless there's nothing else, I'm just going to. Oh, thank you, Ed. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. Okay, so we've got a couple of recommendations here. So we welcome the focus on prevention and wraparound help. That's great. Cabinet to sort of demonstrate benefit of initiatives and programs, tangible proof of doing something, savings and impact. And we just welcome the outcome focus in budget setting processes as well. Is there anything else? Councillor?
Just really trying to get a grip on timetables. I'm assuming that you really round about Christmas will be settling in on where your not necessarily absolutely final figures are, but really paring them down quite a bit by then. Is that a reasonable assumption?
Yeah, I would say while the budget report comes in February, we kind of want to have a position by the end of the calendar year on what that report's going to look like, what the framing of that's going to look like. It focuses on the 25-26 budget with a a nod to the medium term. We will then know what the policy is around council tax. We'll know what funding we'll have, albeit it's called the provisional financial settlement in December. I've never known it to be material different from the provisional to the final. So we say that's pretty much it. Yeah. and we take that through in January.
Yeah, whether we are likely to be meeting in that period to be able to get an update on what
January
of where we're at.
Yeah, so we do have the next time we start will be end of Jan when we'll be back. So by the time you've got the budget in December, we'll get that report way before we meet up again in January. Okay, so yeah, so those are sort of, and that's it really. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jake, for being here. Thank you so much, Councillor Roger. Of course, you're more than welcome to both of you to stay, or indeed you can take leave, not a problem at all. Yeah, sure. Okay. Fair enough. All right. So we do actually now move to agenda item number 4, another substantive item here. So it's the housing update regulation and inspection. So those who were on OSC last municipal year will recall that we intend to consider the council's readiness to respond to new social care inspection regime when the inspectors beat us to the punch and called. We had a foregoer chance to assess the council's readiness, and instead last month received a report on the Care Quality Commission's inspection for the council's adult social care service. We have the opportunity today to do for housing what we were unable to do for adult social care. The Social Housing Regulation Act, passed in July of 2023, reintroduced a more interventionist approach to regulating social landlords. Housing providers with more than 1,000 homes will receive inspection visits from the regulator at least once every 4 years. We had an opportunity to consider this in May of 2024. So today is the second time this year we've had a chance to gauge progress. As you know, London Borough of Hounslow is a landlord around 13,000 local tenants. So we can expect an inspection soon. We are joined today this evening by Phil Cresswell, Executive Director of Regeneration and Housing, and Modesta Launch, Director of Housing as well. Unfortunately, Councillor Sampson is not able to be here tonight. I wish her well. We are asked to note the update on preparations for inspection by the regulator of housing, social housing and council social housing function. Note the formal recognition of the Tenants' Voice Board that will make available its annual reports to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Consider the comments of the nature and sufficiency of these arrangements. So without further ado, if I can just ask, yeah, okay, so Councillor Rajwat is putting a hand up. He's going to be taking over from Councillor Sampson. No problem at all, thank you.
Tonight, Matthew, I'm Councillor Sue Sampson. So as you said, Chair, yeah, apologies from Councillor Sampson. She's got caught up with something. So this is an update. Last time she was here, was actually with me as well in May. I think we follow each other. A lot of work has gone on, and you'll see that detail. Modesta and Phil are here with any questions to bring out some highlights of work that has happened since Councillor Sampson was last here. 3 things. So we've updated our antisocial behaviour and domestic abuse policies, and also an engagement policy for housing, which would give tenants the ability to independently scrutinise the services that they receive. So that's an innovation that has happened. We've submitted the results of our tenant satisfaction measures surveys to the regulator in June. So we are aware of the areas where improvement is required, and that's derived both from the satisfaction survey as well as our own internal gap analysis that has been conducted. And then staff continue to learn from published inspections that are happening elsewhere. That's an important part of this, and incorporating those into the delivery plan. And that is monitored by the Housing Improvement Board. So between the 3 of us, very happy to take any questions that you may have, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rajwat. Is there anything you want, Phil or Modesta, want to add to that?
think most points are covered in the report, Chair. Really happy to receive questions or anything the committee may wish to ask.
Thank you. Okay, so I guess I'll start with the questioning. So how ready is LBH if the inspectors arrive next week?
So I'll set off, and Modesta will probably come in behind me with some of the details, Chair. So clearly the report sets out the preparedness that we've put in place. The detailed specifics are there in relation to understanding the way that the regulatory framework works and on how we take that regulatory framework, apply it in the household setting, and then work through the detail, putting the resident at the heart or the tenant at the heart of our thinking and what we do. And clearly what Councillor Rajwat, leader of the council, and also the report articulates is the progress that we're making and the details within there. What's not in the report is some of the work that Modesta is doing as Director of Housing across London in terms of learning and getting the feedback from other authorities nationally and across London that have been inspected. But also our conversations with the regulator, because clearly we are in continual conversation with the regulator, and we've had 3 sessions now with the regulator and their representatives to understand the information that they want. Every time that the regulator contacts us and asks for information, we turn that around within 24 hours and send it back to them and have dialogue over it. So in terms of preparedness and readiness, the one critical thing that you need is to understand your gaps. Every single authority will have gaps because the regulations are new. So whatever your asset management plan said, or whatever your asset management plan did or was saying, depending on the context of the inspection framework, will depend on where you are and what you need to do in order to talk to those points, talk to those specifics, but actually from a regulatory inspection standard, what that means for tenants. We believe that we are in a good place to know where we are entering into those conversations and preparing for inspection. And that's the key point. It's understanding our progress with what we need to do in order to have those continual conversations and dialogue. And when we're inspected, talk to those points specifically and what plans we're putting in place to get the information and standards and to the standard that the regulator wants. This ultimately is an assurance framework to make sure that tenants use and enjoy our housing as best as they can do, but with particular emphasis around certain points that are set out in the report.
Thank you, Phil. Councillor Emsley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, interesting report and update, and I guess repairs is the big one that everyone on this panel will have had a dozen pieces of casework to do over the past month or so. And I know that in the report, you note that repairs, decent home standards still have a lot of actions outstanding. I think they're yellow. I'm not sure it's RAG rated, but that means that there's actions outstanding since you last came in May. The last Lambton annual report, which was 2023, talked about a 2,000% increase in repairs backlog, and there was also a missed KPI around the number of repairs that were completed on time. I think it was 86%. What tangible action is being done to overcome some of those challenges? Because I think there's lots of stuff in here around engaging tenants, getting feedback from people who are in the homes, but fundamentally what I'm hearing from residents in my ward, and I'm sure it's the same for other people on this committee, people just want action and they want the repairs on time. And if they're living in a home that they don't feel is fit, they want it to be fixed quickly.
Thank you, Councillor Emsley. Right, in terms of the repairs, we have got the end-to-end review that has been jointly done with Lambton that do our repairs. So we started the working group today to try and go through developing an action plan really to work through the improvements in the report. So it's really about going through and understanding what we can do and how quickly we can do them, because ultimately looking at haven't listened to what Jake delivered earlier on. It's about the money in the system. So it's about prioritizing the repair, the one that can be done quickly, and then reviewing again. It goes back again, ties also within our HRA business plan, some of the capital investment, a lot of things that have come up recently in terms of repairs because of historical underinvestment in housing. So a lot of the stock are in poor condition. Therefore, when people complain about damper mold, you go there, you see that you can't quite sort it out simply as it is. But those conversations are taking place. We do recognize that repairs is an area of weakness for us, but it's not just a handful issue. In the inside housing today, 200 landlords were listed in terms of their performance. And I'm not saying we are top of the league, but we didn't come across very badly. We are sort of like in the middle. So that work is ongoing, working with Lambton. As Phil said, we do have an action plan. We have identified our weaknesses. 74% of residents were satisfied with the repair service, and that is on the tenant satisfaction measures, which is what we are required to publish to the regulator every year. We'll be doing another survey end of November, beginning of December, because we need to submit those results by June every year, and we'll continue to engage with residents as well. So the first item that the tenant scrutiny will be looking at is the repair service. So the tenant scrutiny will be independent looking at the repair service, and they're going to be making a recommendation to this overview and scrutiny. And that was in the cabinet report that was when the tenant's voice was agreed by cabinet in July. We have said there that we'll get them to scrutinize our service, and they have told us that they're looking at the repair service. I will be learning lessons from that as well. Thank you.
Everyone, okay. Councillor Raj, right? Yeah, go on.
Absolutely right, that Modesta has said. So part of your question talks to the specifics of repairs, but then there is also that overarching layer of relationship between council and Lambton, which you obviously need some reassurance, and that sits within my area. So I'm working very closely with Councillor Sampson on all the work that's happening within the repair service, and that end-to-end review is a very important thing, and the working group will do their thing. Obviously, we've got someone who works a couple of days a week at Lambton as the interim managing director, and so part of that is around that relationship and that communication line between Lambton and the council, and also what gets reported, to make sure that actually when your resident or my resident reports something that needs repair, as Modesta kind of alluded to, often it's not just damp and mold, there's a number of different things that get packaged up together, that is reported correctly to Lambton so that they can carry out the work in the most effective way. Obviously, we want to get things right the first time, every time. That's not always possible, and we have to accept that. But actually, when those promises are made for a return visit, they are actually carried out in the time. And if they can't be carried out in that time, actually we're open and transparent, and we say that it won't be done within that time for whatever reason that is. But here is the updated plan, if you like.
Thank you, Councillor Rajwat. Councillor Foot, please.
Yeah, I'm a bit confused because I'm getting the impression earlier that the number of empty properties had dropped. In fact, that was a statement. I'm now getting an impression that the number of empty properties has gone up from what was said by the young lady.
No. So through you, just to clarify that 2% is the target rate for voids. We are looking to maximise the way that number will come down overall, and we're looking specifically at the investment amount within each void across 3 areas. But overall, the projection is coming down. It's more positive than it was this time 12 months ago, this time 24 months ago. The point that I have to point out here is that the way that repairs are done are a lot more complicated now. Within the pack, you've got the kind of 4 measures that social consumer standards are delivered through the framework, and therefore we have to take on board, whereas years ago we'd have decent home standards, now we've got and the consumer standards, and they're split across 4 main blocks. So we have to take everything in balance. So the nature of repairs is becoming more complicated, and the effective repairs and reporting of their progress. So it's not just the report themselves, not just the repairs themselves, it's the reporting and tracking of progress all carries cost. Everything in the system carries cost. So the cost of repairs is increasing, and the complexity of the nature of those repairs is increasing as we look at neighbourhood safety, tenancy and transparency within the overall grid of complexity within what's now referred to as social housing consumer standards. The report also sets out the way that legislatively that is changing, and the way that the changing nuances around the legislation means that we've got to be constantly in tune with that to make sure that our repair service fits within that framework. We are fortunate that we've got Lambton within the group of companies that operate services through Koala to us. What the end-to-end review process is doing is really mapping out quite finitely how those systems and processes work in order to maximize the effect delivering through the consumer standards. The committee may remember, it was probably this time last year actually, that the new governance was brought through Lambton in terms of the commissioning arrangements, and they're being refined as well. So sorry for any confusion.
Sorry, if I can just clarify as well that in terms of the voice, they've actually reduced by over 50%. This time last year, we had over 400 voice. Now we have just over 200 that need to be, they have reduced, yes, we do track the numbers weekly, and we discuss with the leader at the quarterly meeting as well, and I'm quite happy to send a report on how it's gone down. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mayor, please.
Yeah, just my question on inspection. As Chair just mentioned, that we have 13,000 council tenants. How often are inspection carried out on council properties, and what specific criteria are used during those inspections?
Are you referring to the tenancy audit, visiting our tenants?
No.
Okay. Yeah. So what we do have at the moment, the housing officers will engage. There are scheduled tenancy audit visits, which we have said from now we're going to be visiting at least 25% of tenants on scheduled tenancy audit visit. But in addition to that, the housing officers, we see tenants maybe because of rent arrears. They will also see them because of maybe tenancy sustainment issues. Maybe they need support. So there are various ways that we touch base with our tenants on a regular basis. So what we are now doing is to collect all that information together so that we'll be able to know how many of our tenants we've been able to contact within a year. Because at the moment, if you just say, well, you're doing tenancy audit to find out whether Modesta lives there, then that's a different figure to who you've contacted because they've got an issue, or maybe repairs people have made contact with them. So what we are doing is to collect all of them to see how many we've actually been able to visit in the course of the year. In addition, what we have got some tenants, we've got a project that by the end of January, we should have up-to-date telephone number and email for all our tenants as well, because there are some of them that we do have their address, we do have landline telephone number, but we're trying to get everybody up to speed so that if we want to bulk message them, we can either use a text message or we use email, and that will also save us money in postage as well, and in terms of people not getting their letters. So there is a lot of things we are doing as well. It's within our improvement plan to make sure that we improve our communication and engagement with tenants.
Can I just, sorry, Councillor Mia, I just want us to, and I just want to just come back to the committee panel. Can we just try and stick with the reason why we got them in the first place? This is regulatory, is an inspection visit. This is what we can be here all day and speak to Modesta and Phil. I get that, but if there's something that's different to what we got to the agenda, I'm sure you can ping out an email and whatever else. That's perfectly fine. But if we can just come back to what we actually want, the inspection reports. Thank you. Question, Councillor Nagra.
Thank you, Chair. My question is regarding about the tenant satisfaction measure survey. So I do, this is page number 3 basically on your report. I just want to be clear of this one. Is mentioned this survey is actually carried out yearly basis. I'm just a bit confused. Here is mentioned 3.9 is normally every June you do survey. First of all, I want to ask that what do you ask in survey for the about for tenants, and how much you get the response back from tenants? And other one you mentioned is a randomly draft date, and which will be beginning in November. Is this one is a different? The normally you carried out the survey in June. 3.9 and 3.8.
Well, okay. So the tenant satisfaction survey is a regulatory requirement. We don't ask the question. We've got a set of questions set by the regulator that we have to ask, because every authority, every housing provider have to ask the same question so that they can compare the result. So there are some of them, 12 of them are around compliance data, for example, gas safety, electricity safety, decent homes. So those are set questions. Then there are things we call the perception surveys, which is, for example, how happy are they with the complaints process? How happy, satisfied are they with repairs? How happy do they think that the landlord treat them with respect? So those are the perception surveys, but it's the same question that is asked by every landlord in the country. And that survey happens between now, you can do it between now and January, but you must submit your result to the regulator by 30th of June. So they set the deadline. So we did it 30th of June gone. So we got the company ready to do the survey for us again this year by end of November, so that they can analyze the results for us to then submit it by 30th of June. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for clear.
So one of the questions from me, does the regulator or inspectors, do they have any sort of targets we need to conform to, KPIs or anything like that?
So the regulatory judgments, there are 4. It's C1, C2, C3, or C4. C1 being the best performing. There is no C1 result at the moment. Within the park, we have got some authorities that have got C2. None of them are within London, and they're sort of very smaller landlords, Stock Transfer Authority, and every London borough inspected to date have either got C3, and the worst one being Newham being the only authority that have got C4. All the London authorities have got C3 as we speak, and a lot of it is driven by the factors that have been described here today around lack of investment in stock, and
it's also a judgment, Chair. It's also a judgment, so that means during the inspection there is an opinion form, and feedback is given the inspection, plus also the information and the data. I think what's unusual or particular or peculiar is the inspection will be probably a 3-day intense visit, but there'll be information gathering ahead, and there'll be information gathering and visits a while after. So it won't be such that you'll receive something instantaneously. It's when all information has been collated and areas have been tested and probed, including possibly a visit to overview and scrutiny. Until the inspection specifics are known for Hounslow and the timescales that they're going to be occupied over, we will not be in a position to get that feedback and the judgment.
Thank you for that, Phil. Any other question from committee members? Are we happy? We're like, yes, we are ready for the inspectors to come tomorrow, and nothing's bugging us at all. Okay, Councillor Yates.
Sorry, I know you just explained the process briefly then. So with the inspection, so you'll have, did you say 3 days with you here? And then can you just explain how many properties will be expected, what they'll be looking for, and timeframes, just to give a quick overview of the inspection process?
Yeah, so I mean, we're learning more about the inspection process as we go through, and those authorities that have been inspected and housing associations too, we're learning more from it. But we have taken a very particular approach with the regulator, which was we've reached out to the regulator in advance. So some authorities are waiting for the regulator to contact there. We are in dialogue with the regulator regularly. And therefore, if there was anything that, well, we believe if there's anything that the regulator wasn't happy about to date, they would have notified us that they were going to come in and look at that information and data. So the first thing to say, Councillor Yates, is we're not in that position. Everything that we sent them thus far, they've been okay and content with. They will announce to us when the inspection will be. It could be any time within the next period of 4 years. But we anticipate that it will be sometime during 2025. When they do notify us, we'll have a period of time to get information together. We've got a plan specifically for that inspection and when the inspectors arrive here in Hounslow House. But they will tell us what they want to look at based on the information and the returns that we will do in regard to our inspection readiness. Do you want to pick up on the particular form?
Yeah. So in terms of the practicalities, then as Phil said, they publish they tell you like in the quarter if you're going to be between December, January, February. So Phil or Nile, somebody will get a phone call saying you're within the next batch. But then they don't actually tell you the date. You just know you're within the next batch. But what then happened? They don't give you 3 weeks notice to say when it's going to be. And then they send us what is called their context form. And their context form is for us to talk about Hounslow, what we are doing, all our performance information. We'll be working very closely with Sarah's team, get all the information, submit to them. The tenant satisfaction measures we talked about earlier on, they would have looked at that because that's the information they kept asking us to clarify that Phil was referring to. So they look at that data. Then they have a meeting with the leader, have a meeting with the lead member. They may see the overview and scrutiny. They have seen them in some councils. Ask for a meeting with the overview and scrutiny. Then talk to all of you. Then they meet with residents, meet with some of the contractors, meet with some of the stakeholders, and go away then. Read all the paperwork. They might be here for 3 days. They read all the paperwork. They might come back and ask some questions, have further meetings face to face. And at the end of it, then they come back and give us their opinion.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Any other sort of question from members on this? You're happy with that? Anything, Leader, you want to, no, that's fine, thank you very much. Okay, look, so we'll move on to recommendations. We've got some here again, committee panel can add if we wish. So far we've got welcome the work done and progress made to be inspected, inspection ready. So yep, thank you for that. Requesting regular updates on voids by Modesto or your department, that'd be nice. So if we can just have a look at that, because I think it comes all the time that we just want updates on voids. It doesn't need to be this, an email, something, just send us it, that'd be absolutely fine. Once inspected, OSC would like to have either Councillor Sampson or Modesto return and just talk to us about the inspection findings, whether it's good or bad, and hopefully it is a C2. Yeah, okay, brilliant. All right. Well, is there any other recommendations from panel? No, brilliant. Okay, so we'll go with that. Is everybody happy with that? Thank you very much. Okay, passed. So we'll have those recommendations in there. Thank you all. Firstly, I'd like to just say thank you, Phil and Modesta. You're more than welcome to stay or go. A special thank you for Phil, as I have learned that you're moving on to other areas in the country. So thank you so much for all your work in London Borough of Hounslow, and wish you well for the future as well, Phil.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. Thank you for your kind words.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you. Okay, so we do move on to agenda item number 5 here. So this is just really the updates from scrutiny panels. OSC will now would have had 3 scrutiny panels working across the municipal year. Each panel has met at least one, so we now have the opportunity to hear from those panel chairs. Was the case of last month. Okay, so Councillor Sidhu first, please, if you can provide an update on children's and adult people's scrutiny panel, please.
Yeah, the panel had the first meeting of the year, which we got Councillor Emma Yates to agree to be vice chair. We have discussed the topic of the year of a deep dive, and currently we are developing our terms of reference. Our agreed topic is the impact of socio-economic disadvantage in primary level schooling, which will include the attainment and attendance across different groups of pupils. In terms of reference, we will share across in the next OSC meeting.
Brilliant, thank you for that. So unfortunately, Councillor Gull is not with us, so I'll just be getting a few bits here. So we'll make sure that we will get an update next time on the work of health and adult care scrutiny panel. I'll draw the committee's attention to questions the panel will investigate as set out in your agenda packs as well. For instance, what is the commissioning approach taken by London Borough of Hounslow? How does London Borough of Hounslow award adult social care contracts? How are these contracts managed and monitored, and what metrics are used for this purpose? What impacts do current staffing levels in certain providers have on the delivery of our contractual obligations? And what mechanisms exist to ensure that providers are providing adequate service to residents? So that is the work of the adult social care team. Councillor Nagra, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to give the update of Housing and Environment Scrutiny Panel. The first meeting of the Housing and Environment Scrutiny Panel took place on Thursday, 10th of October 2024, where Councillor Rhys Williams was appointed as Vice Chair. Members received an overview of the scrutiny process, an overview of flood risk in Hounslow, and a summary of the activities of last year's panel as well. Members discussed potential lines of inquiry to inform the terms of reference, which are currently being drafted and will be agreed prior to the second panel meeting. Members expressed some interest in exploring, such as the borough's preparedness for fluvial and sewer flooding incidents, the effectiveness of the Thames barrier and other flood defense along the riverbank, the council's engagement with residents, businesses, and community groups on the topic of flood resilience, how the borough's flood preparedness compares to its local authority neighbors. Members highlighted that at future meetings, they want to invite some representatives from Thames Water, the Environment Agency, TfL, and the Thames Strategy Partnership. The second panel meeting will take place next month on Wednesday, 6th of November 2024. This meeting will focus on acquainting members with the council's role as the lead local flood authority, with presentation from Councillor Catherine Dunn as a cabinet member for climate, environment and transport, and Timothy Arnold as a head of resilience and contingency planning. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Nagra. Whilst it is very early days for our scrutiny panels this municipal year, as the Centre of Governance and Scrutiny report made clear, they can play an important role in looking in depth at substantial issues and policy development. I'm sure I'm not alone in looking forward to hearing more of all three of you over the course of the coming meetings. So well done for that. Okay, so we move on to agenda item number 6. This is the forward plan. The forward plan sets out information about decisions the council intends to make over the coming weeks. The committee can now review council's forward plan and consider if there are decisions it would like to bring to future meetings of OSC. Having reviewed the forward plan, are there topics you would like to consider? If there are, I would ask officers to investigate how this might be brought back before the committee. So do please reach out to the officers to see if there is something in the forward plan that you would like us to visit. Okay, so we are now kind of moving on to agenda item number 7. This is, of course, our work programme. So Scrutiny developed a work programme at the beginning of the municipal year. It's good practice is keep the document under review. It is a live document after all. Members have before them a current work programme, detailed changes since we met in June to scope the draft. Members be aware that the most recent change has seen a moving of our SEND and safety valve item to later in the municipal year. So take into account the findings that will emerge from the SEND ear review that is currently taking place, as we've already said. Are there any other issues the committee thinks we should consider? We must remember, though, our time is finite, so if there is new items that need to be added, we may need to remove others. Is there anything on the work programme? Everyone happy with that? Brilliant, thank you. All right, so swiftly moving on to agenda item number 8, which is urgent business. Nothing from me, anybody from anyone else? Thank you. And moving on to agenda item number 9, which is the date of the next meeting of the 23rd of January 2025. And to that, I draw the meeting to an end. Thank you all for being here. Oh, go on.
Stuff I've written down about the annual budget. Sorry. Yeah, about the annual budget. And you know, how much data we'll have before Christmas, or whether we'll have anything before Christmas. Judging on what you just said, no, we're talking about the new year that this information is going to be available. Is that correct?
So once, once, of course, we've got information by December, I'm sure it'll be sort of leader and cabinet, but we will get it way in advance, probably at January, beginning of January, when we'll actually get it, all the information. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously as early as possible.
Oh, 100%. I agree. I agree, Councillor Foot. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Just one thing, Councillor Foot. Of course, whenever Cabinet receives a budget report, the committee gets sight of that as well. So you've got the other background prior to your meeting in January to just build and build and build on the finance information you have.
Well done. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here tonight. And thank you to the residents who are on YouTube as well. So thank you so much. Good night.